Let's now open the most international space, giving the floor to Paolo Emanuele Rozo Sordini of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are now filming and recording this initiative, and we will try to put it in YouTube, and we try to really enhance it somehow. So whoever will take the floor, please try to be as close as possible so that the camera could take them without displacing too much. I would like now to give him the floor and I thank him for being here with us, our friend and hopefully future collaborator, Paolo Emanuele Rozo Sordini of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank CGIL and the Rights of the Move project for organizing this important and interesting event, and also for involving the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I wish to introduce myself in the first place. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Italy, I deal with the fostering and protection of human rights in multilateral contexts, working in close coordination with all EU partners and all the members of the United Nations and other international organizations that have been following through this area and this topic at a multilateral level. I belong to a small unit which is made up of 3 people. However, this unit deals with a number of matters related to the protection of human rights, and these cases are all evolving and sophisticated cases, and sometimes we need to have distant positions match. Therefore, our work, the work of diplomacy, is to succeed in reducing criticalities, rounding off corners, and finding new ways to be able to reach and attain the goals that we are pursuing. In this respect, I would like to stress the relevance of events like the conference held today at the CGIL. Office. It is a tangible sign of the momentum that civil society can give in terms to this topic, in terms of awareness raising among public opinion, as well as a valuable support for institutions themselves. Without the help of civil society and the main stakeholders of society, it would be impossible to work in this area. My short and yet well-established experience in the field of human rights has given evidence that the best and wider scale results have always been obtained whenever we could establish a dialogue and a sort of osmosis between, on the one hand, the government with its areas of competence and responsibilities, and on the other hand, the main and living partners of society the main stakeholders of society that can have an influence on public opinion and can help diplomats and institutions work in a better way to lay the foundations of a fruitful activity. In the area of human rights, the main rule is that we need to make short steps. The best results in history in the area of human rights were obtained very seldom overnight. It took us many years, it took us ages, it took us sacrifice to win battles like the battle against death penalty, or to foster and encourage the protection of children and women globally. And this rule also applies to the protection of LGBT people. Whenever this process could be speeded up in terms of uprooting some criticalities or eradicating some problems, there were also steps backwards. Therefore, it is important to strengthen the results obtained and on that basis, on that foundation, try to widen the horizon, widen the area of work to cover other fields and other areas as well that are related to the full enjoyment of rights among all people, all human beings, including LGBT people. Let me now move on to the main topic of my speech, that is the state of the art of LGBTs in main multilateral fora, namely the European Union, United Nations, and the Council of Europe. The reason why I suggested that I could deliver a speech on this topic is that globally the situation of the protection of LGBT's rights is a situation that is not homogeneous. There are striking differences and gaps between countries. So the situation is really very spotted and uneven, and there are differences between different geographical areas. In the kind of work that we are performing, and for all the reasons I have mentioned, we try to focus on the main criticalities that are mostly related to countries where affections and sexual relationships between people of the same sex are criminalized by the provisions of our criminal codes that provide for imprisonment. In 5 countries of the world, there is even death penalty, and in other 76 countries, adult same-sex relationships are considered as a crime and an offense that is punished with imprisonment. And then there are also other phenomena related to discrimination that cover a wide range of different contexts, powerfully described by the speakers who spoke before me, including discrimination in access to the labor market, discrimination in access to healthcare services, discrimination in the family context that also have an impact on children who belong to contexts in which families are made up by same-sex parents or transgender parents. There is also another phenomenon which is of much concern in my personal opinion, because it can penetrate our societies. Although it is not adequately covered by our legal systems, which is homophobia. Homophobia is a very dangerous phenomenon that caused alarming reactions in EU countries and which is amplified by social media in forms like cyberbullying and related phenomena. Therefore, our purpose is to root out these phenomena, which are critical, and convince and persuade governments to erase or repeal any legal provisions from their legal orders that forbid same-sex relationships and ensure equal access to the labor market to all citizens regardless of their gender identity in all areas of society, and root out any homophobic tendency that hinders the full enjoyment of rights and can even be a hazard to the safety of LGBT people, or can make their lives extremely difficult. So we can assert that at present, at the international level, there is a major focus on this topic, and Italy is really in the front line in terms of promoting LGBT rights at multilateral fora. We belong to all working groups that have been established by international organizations to cover these topics. Specifically, as far as the European Union is concerned, I could notice in my daily work and the working groups that I lead in Brussels, namely the PESC group on human rights, that the process has been speeded up in the last 2 years in terms of the emphasis on LGBT rights. For instance, in June 2012, the Council of the European Union officially passed a strategic framework on human rights and related action plan. These acts are extremely relevant, in my opinion, because not only do they engage the 28 member states of the European Union, but also European institutions in defining the European priorities as far as human rights are concerned. And among these priorities is the promotion and protection of LGBT rights and condemning any type of discrimination founded on sexual orientation and gender identity, or SOGI discrimination. This document is not just a formal act with no practical impact. On the contrary, it compels the European Union to regularly account for the developments on individual priorities that have been established by the European Union in this area of work. The first result achieved by the European Union and its 28 member states in this area has been the recent adoption last June of the first EU guidelines on LGBT rights. These EU guidelines are an operational document whereby the European Union stresses a number of tools that the European Union and its delegations in third countries, as well as member states working in different geographical areas of the world, can use in order to, one, detect any criticalities that exist in a number of countries. And in order to identify these critical areas, the guidelines point out some parameters related to LGBT right protection standards. For instance, the absence or presence of LGBT legislation, the protection of access to the labor market and healthcare services, protection of freedom of association and freedom of press, the protection of human rights defenders, who are people who are partisans of the protection of human rights and act locally and operationally in order to protect LGBT rights. These guidelines and related documents and measures are operational now. EU delegations, with the help of individual member states, i.e. national embassies based in third countries where there are critical situations in terms of the protection of LGBT status and rights, must perform actions ranging from formal steps vis-à-vis a number of governments to say that they hope or wish that that particular government will promote legislative reforms in order to promote access to healthcare services without non-discrimination and all other priorities that I stressed a few moments ago. Of course, these guidelines have also been reflected in country strategies, which are national strategies performed by countries where the European Union is present or works. These country plans have transposed part of these strategies for the protection of LGBT rights and their promotion. In the drafting of these guidelines and in the work that is performed on a daily basis by the European Union institutions and member states in those countries, of course, Italy is in the front line. We have been working in several working groups and we have participated in drafting these guidelines. These guidelines were drawn up jointly by the Council of the European Union as well as the Commission of the European Union with the support of the European Parliament and NGOs. Now, moving forward to the United Nations, I must say that the situation is slightly more complex, considering the number of UN member states and the different degrees of awareness of these member states on our topic of interest. However, in this field too, I can stress a few relevant major results obtained. For instance, in March 2012, a cross-regional statement was issued by a special task force that was set up in the Human Rights Council, and this cross-regional statement on LGBT rights was signed by as many as 85 UN member states. That's for a very high number of member states signed it, including the then 27 EU member states. This statement enshrines clearly the principle of non-discrimination in all its forms that are founded on sexual orientation and gender identity. This statement is extremely important because it formed the basis for pooling the consent and agreement of member states on a statement that enabled the UN to pass the first resolution issued by the Council of Human Rights, which is based in Geneva and is the main UN institution in charge of the promotion and protection of human rights. The Council of Human Rights passed the first resolution on human rights, sexual orientation and gender identity in 2012. That resolution was unprecedented, with 29 votes for, 19 votes against, and 3 abstentions. At that time, Italy was not a member of the UN Council on Human Rights, although it, of course, supported the adoption of this resolution because it was a member of the core group that had promoted the UN Human Rights Council statement. A number of subsequent steps forward were made by the United Nations thanks to the relevant stances taken by Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. Although the discrimination of LGBT is a topic that is gaining ground not only in Geneva but also in New York, thanks to the catalyzing role of the Secretary General and the activism of the core group that we belong to. In the General Assembly of the United Nations, there is some resistance at present, especially concerning the inclusion in the UN agenda of LGBT rights. That is why we considered that because at present it is more difficult to hold negotiations at the General Assembly, it would be probably more advisable to focus our attention on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations for it to be able to pass a new resolution that would be the second resolution issued by the UN Human Rights Council. In the European Union, there is much interest in this and strong support. Last year, at an international level, a number of different initiatives were promoted. Among the main goals is the promotion and presentation of this new resolution. Of course, the problem is that we should enable this resolution, first of all, to be submitted, and for it to be submitted, we should find a country that can be the promoter of this resolution. This promoting country should belong to the area of more skeptical countries, in which public opinion is particularly suspicious of this topic. Because, of course, if this resolution were to be submitted by Sweden, to name just one, the risk would be, of course, that such a proposal be considered by the United Nations as the promotion of Western countries' values as opposed to a traditionally different view from other countries. That is why it is important, and that is our main challenge, for us to have this initiative be suggested by countries where there are major problems in terms of discrimination against LGBT and LGBT rights. As I said, Italy played a major role, and another important resolution was the one on female genital amputation that was submitted not by Italy, but by the African group, for the same reason as I stated, because we asked the African group to be the spokesgroup of this proposal, because we mean to widen the range of countries that experience these problems and act as promoters of actions to combat these problems. So we're working, for instance, at present in order to raise awareness of the South African government that in the past said it was interested in submitting this resolution. there is some resistance. Hence, we thought that this resolution may be submitted and passed last year. We realized, however, that the number of votes for it wouldn't be sufficient. So we need to go on working to raise awareness among the group of South African countries where the greatest challenges exist. Without the engagement of this group, which should be as large as possible, the resolution wouldn't be useful, or at least not fully useful. Let me now move on to another international organization that deals with these issues, which is the Council of Europe. In my opinion, it is a strategic institution that works on LGBT right protection for a number of reasons. First of all, because the Council of Europe is made up of 47 members, as you know, and it covers all of the European continent. Among these 47 member states, there are countries in which the standards for the protection and promotion of LGBT rights are well advanced, but there are also other states in which these standards are extremely weak, if not completely lacking. Therefore, the Council of Europe is an organization that can use its boards, the Committee of Ministers, the Secretary General, as well as the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which are its main bodies. It can do much to attain our nurtured goal to create a homogeneous area in Europe and beyond, where human right protection standards, including the protection of LGBT rights, can be secured in a very homogeneous way. This would secure the consistency in the European Union and beyond it, because as you will certainly imagine, it is very hard to negotiate with a number of stakeholders, pointing to them when in our own countries the situation is not better. Therefore, we should consider ensuring greater consistency also in the European Union in the first place, as well as consistency in Europe as a whole. The Council of Europe is an international organization that can play this role because it comprises a number of states that are extremely aware of policies and issues, and there are also many countries that support the work of the Council of Europe, and that's why we are multiplying our efforts at the level of the Council of Europe as well. The Council of Europe itself issued a recommendation on the protection of LGBT rights and the condemnation of any kind of SOGI discrimination. This resolution, this recommendation came 1 year earlier than the United Nations resolution, and it is recommendation 5 of 2010. Let me now draw some conclusions. First of all, legislative reforms are of paramount importance, as Alexander Schuster emphasized. It is also important, though, to educate and train people in the field of human rights. Human rights education and training is not limited to the education we can deliver in our schools, but it should cover all the stakeholders in this area. This education and training should introduce the values of respect, tolerance, the eradication of prejudice that unfortunately still exists among our families. Much stress is placed on protecting children's rights, especially children that belong to same-sex parent families. But in many families, what is not taken into account is that the value of respect should be transferred to children. We are not teaching our children that any human being deserves respect and is entitled to the same opportunities and conditions as other human beings. And as far as Italy is concerned, I may say that in connection with the work performed by the Council of Europe, the Italian government, namely UNAR, is extremely proactive. It is trying to increase knowledge of rainbow families. It is trying to have the prejudice linked to the sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination be eradicated. And I consider today's conference and the Rights on the Move European project to act along this line. And I consider it to be extremely useful because it is providing myself with additional food for thought and new ideas to be able to speak to my colleagues in partner countries of the European Union with whom I exchange on a monthly basis on these topics. Let me thank Ms. Toniolo and let me tell her that I'm at your full disposal to leave this communication channel open between the CGIL, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and all other stakeholders. Thank you.
Grazie, dottor Rozo Sordini. Lei preavviso già un intervento.
Thank you so much. There will be a question later on to you during the debate. And now giving the floor to Ned Lowton of the OIL, International Labour Organization. And then We'll have a short break, 10 minutes, with a coffee break.